All right. Well, John, thank you for
Thanks, Jim.
coming out and letting me interview you today about Madison Tree and kind of your experience in horticulture. Um, this is for the class, the horticulture technology class at UC. And typically we bring students out to see you, and this time we're just going to bring you to the students
Okay,
via
great.
video.
I'm excited.
So I got a series of questions that I want to kind of go over with you today and just learn a little bit about your business, about you, and really where you see the tree care industry going in the future. So I'm going to just kind of start back at the beginning. You guys have a very rich history of tree care, probably the most rich history in Cincinnati of tree care. Can you talk a little bit about how your grandfather came to start a tree business, and where did his love of trees come from?
Sure. He grew up on an orchard. It was the Emery Estate, Peterloon Farm. Do you know where that's at?
I do, up in
Over.
Indian Hill.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Super cool place. And so they actually lived on the farm. And my grandfather was the orchardist, and my grandfather, grew up seeing all of that. And there's stories of him going to school, walking to the bus with a tree book in his nose, and he's like literally reading about trees.
Wow.
The whole time. And so I think that was the initial start of how he really became interested in taking care of trees the proper way versus, back at that time there was topping, spiking,
Yep.
all of those things, and those are practices that he immediately, knew weren't the right way to do it, and started climbing with ropes and harnesses and trying to make proper cuts. And Alex Shigo was like one of his, probably most prominent authors that he would read all the time. And there's actually a cool story. In Shigo would sign all of his books to my grandfather, to the first real tree toucher.
Wow.
And to me, that's just like one of the most like powerful things to like understand what an impact he had on the industry. And you don't realize it when you grow up with him. He's just your grandpa, but when you look back, it's like, this is pretty special.
Yeah, that's a really unique legacy because, he would have been growing up on a orchard probably in the 30s and 40s, I would
Yeah.
assume.
Yep.
I remember you told me one time that he was in the Navy and worked on a submarine.
Mm-hmm.
Is that accurate?
Yep. Yep.
And so his love of trees came from him being a very young boy and
Yeah.
being around it his whole career.
Absolutely.
So he started the business. Your dad, his brothers, your uncles, all came in and have worked in the business for a long time.
And my aunt,
And your aunt.
Aunt Rusty, she's passed away now, but she was a really integral part of the business being as successful as it is.
Because I would think that back when your grandfather started this, the tree care industry was very different. It was probably more of a, I don't want to say luxury industry, but it just was very different back then. You don't think of big trees you guys are out in Hyde Park and Indian Hill pruning these ancient old oaks.
Mm-hmm.
That probably wasn't done a whole lot at that point on the scale it is now.
That's correct. I think you had to be definitely the wealthy elite to pay someone to prune your trees, even if it was a hazard.
Yes.
I think you just dealt with the hazard, and that was part of your life.
Yeah.
Where now, most of our work is preventative maintenance and taking care of these big trees and keeping them together rather than just waiting for a failure and having to take them down.
Yeah. So let's drill down to kind of you. You obviously grew up around this. Why did you ultimately choose this industry? And I know for you, it's much more than just, well, it's my grandfather's, my dad's, my business. What kind of drives you behind just this love of trees?
Well, I have a 12-year-old son now,
Mm-hmm.
and I look at him and I say, Ed, what do you want to do when you grow up? And he says this or that or whatever. And sometimes he says he wants to work with me.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to reflect back because of this relationship. And I said, at 12, did I know that I wanted to do this? The answer is no. I was learning skills about the business. I was helping my dad in the front yard. At 13, I was going on to landscape job sites for the company and spreading mulch and doing those kind of things. By 14 and 15, I was starting to learn how to prune trees without a chainsaw yet, but I was doing the work, and for me it was a way to make money.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the same time, I was actually, like, my grandfather secondhand man in his own yard, and he was retired and he needed somebody to help him do the physical work in the yard. And so I think that's where my roots probably stuck in this industry, and I didn't know it, and I didn't know how much he was teaching me. And I was making money to pay for gas and insurance and all the other things that you need money for in high school, and I didn't realize that it was just what I wanted to do forever. And then eventually I made the decision to go to college for horticulture.
Yeah.
So
talk a little bit about that. You went to Ohio State University, studied horticulture. Talk a little bit about that experience and how it kind of relates to work now. And then you've been very involved with various professional organizations, really global professional organizations. Talk a little bit about how that's had an impact on your career, as the president of Madison Tree now.
Sure. Well, I want to clarify, I'm a vice president of Madison Tree. My father's still the president.
Gotcha.
I do a lot of acting roles of the leadership of the company without necessarily the title to it, but I'm the vice president. I don't want to get called out for that
right.
later. So I actually started at University of Cincinnati as an undecided major. Next year I went to horticulture, and it was at night, and I loved UC. I loved the program, but I didn't want to go to night school, and so I transferred to Ohio State. And of course they started me all over with credits, basically.
Nice.
Even though they said, but I ended up falling into, in my opinion, one of the best things that could have happened to me. I applied for a scholarship. It was called the Donald Mayhew Scholarship, and essentially it was a 20 to 30 hour a week paid job in the Arboretum, Chadwick Arboretum on campus at Ohio State, and a full tuition covered. And it was, all I had to do was maintain above a B average to keep it through the remainder of my degree.
Wow.
So it was like this awesome opportunity. I learned things. They took us to arboreta all over the East Coast and in the region. I got to network with lots of other brilliant horticulturalists at the same time. And I was I consider myself a little bit of a loner in that I was the tree guy of the group, which was well respected, but it was definitely a different take than what a lot of the other people there were going for. And so I graduated in 2003, and instead of coming back to the family business, and this is something that I actually thank my dad for a lot, but he always said, I want you to feel what it's like to work for somebody else, and not be at the family business the whole time, and bring something new back. And I went to Decker's Nursery, which is mainly a propagation, but they also do wholesale plants there. And I worked there for 3 years and developed an amazing relationship with Brian Decker. I'm still good friends with him to this day, and he just taught me so much about business and about plants. And I learned about, the cool part about working at a nursery, in particular propagation nursery. You learn how it's made, you learn how to grow it, you learn how to get it up to size, and then as an arborist and a horticulturalist, I learned how to treat them, through their final stages of life as well. So I feel like I have a full spectrum of plants from start to finish. So that was all just an amazing experience for me. And then I wasn't sure that I was going to come back to the family business. I was doing really well there, and then we just had conversations, and we ended up negotiating to where I came back to work for the family business.
Wow.
So definitely, I didn't expect any of that to happen, and it, life happens.
What roles have professional organizations, I'm thinking the International Society of Arboriculture, people like that, organizations like that, what influence have they had on your career?
Well, I think the ISA is really good for the size that they are, and marketing that there's something more than just being a tree trimmer, that you can be an arborist and this is a career, and there's there's a path to do this, and here's the educational programs that you can follow to go with it. And sometimes it's frustrating with CEUs, and you have 100 different courses you can take, and it's kind of overwhelming sometimes. But I think that having that organization to lean back on and say we're not all the same, and there are people who are educated and doing the right things for trees, that I think the ISA in particular has done a great job at advocating that side of things for arborists.
You know, one of the things that I encourage my students to do is join some of these organizations because it's a great networking opportunity. I would assume that that's been good for you as well, just to see what people from around the world are doing in the tree care industry.
I couldn't agree more. Networking is like one of the top things. Well, as a student, I think like gaining real life experience,
Yes.
and your internship should be challenging and they should be diverse, and you should do more than what they're asking you to do as a requirement for your degree. I think the more experience you can get, the more. I'm just thinking of like somebody that was coming here looking for a job. For me, it's like, well, I went to school, and it's like, well, you know, that doesn't really give you the experience you need for me to pay you what you're wanting to make after having a college degree.
Yes.
And I really think that added experience of having multiple in-depth internships, or even take off a year and see if you like it or not before you invest in a formal education, or at the end of it, you know, maybe just try something out before you really expect to get paid for your degree, because you just need that practical experience and the formal education too. Those two combined, but one without the other just doesn't do a whole lot in the industry.
Yeah.
The other organization that I've been a big part of recently is ASCA, the American Society of Consulting Arborists, and that's more of a consultation branch where we will value trees, or we'll write construction specifications for protecting trees on a property. We may anything that you would write a report for from a tree form, insurance damages, sometimes they're property invasions. There's all kinds of things of which you may write a report for a tree that you don't even think about. As I'm sitting here, I'm kind of drawing a blank, but I was on the board of directors for ASCA for I think 5 years, and eventually became the president, which was a great learning experience in life, and something that I don't regret doing, but I'm glad it's over, because it took
a lot of commitment. You're running a business and then also kind of leading an organization. That's a big. That's a national organization.
Yep. Yeah, international, really. I mean,
Wow.
It says American, but it's, you know, it has members from all over the world. And I've been involved in committees on the ONLA and ISA over time, but none of them is substantial as that role.
Wow.
That was a lot.
Well, Madison Tree's been around a long time. In a nutshell, kind of give us a sense of how it's evolved over time, and then also talk in your response, talk about or discuss what are some of the factors that you feel drove those changes.
Well, I think that from my perspective, which is absolutely biased, is that we've been the elite tree care company in Cincinnati from the very beginning. And that's before I was around, but that's
the origin.
You know, that's what I've always felt. And I think our drive from my father and uncles and aunt and my brother, starting with my grandfather, is to keep that reputation. It's not just a business for us, it's our family legacy. And it just means so much more than making money or doing one job and moving on. We want to build long-term relationships with clients. We want to build long-term relationships with employees. We want to have a team assembled that can appropriately conquer jobs that other companies can't do, and do it better than they can. I think, to answer your question, the company's always been at the cutting edge, but to stay at the cutting edge means that you have to continually grow and get better and do more. And if you think staying in the same spot and saying, oh, we're the best, is ever going to be a recipe for success, I think it's the first recipe for failure. And for me, it's a constant stride to always analyze what's going on in the industry, what's going on in the world, what's going on in our business, and how do we make that better. A lot of it have been, just some examples would be equipment to make our jobs safer and easier on people. You know, when I was a kid, we had the chippers that were the drum chippers, and you put a branch in it, like whips everything through, and those are super dangerous. We would load logs in the back of a black box truck in the middle of the summer, and it's 100 degrees, and you're bent over like this, moving logs and stacking them in the truck to get. It's a rarity if any of that happens anymore. We have the mini loaders that anytime we can get to it, we want to get the crews the appropriate machinery. The climbing portion of the tree work is amazing because I haven't climbed on any real level for 20 years, maybe slightly less than that, and I'm watching all of the new tools and development that our crews are using in networking with other people in the industry, at the tree climbing competitions from other companies, and they have all these ascenders, and they're like walking up the trees, and the energy that they expend to get the job done is just, they're so much more efficient than I ever was when I did it, and it's so cool to see this grow and not just be the same old way that I always did it. And it's kind of frustrating to get left behind, and I'm growing in other ways. I can't do all of those things, but it's just amazing to see how far things have come since then. And I really think that what we thought was professional 20 years ago, we would laugh at now is what professionalism is. It's just not the same level. I really think that it's a prestigious career, and it takes an extremely intelligent person, and it takes somebody that's really physical. And you don't have to be some big, strong, burly man to do it, but you have to be physical, and you have to want it, and you have to be smart. Those are the things that separate you from somebody that can't do the work effectively.
It sounds like to me then, based on that response, would it be safe to say that the primary driving force behind the evolution of Madison Tree is just a growth mindset? You're just constantly looking for that way to incrementally get better.
Yeah, and I'm like way more of a fan of slow and steady growth. I think it's healthier. I think it's more sustainable.
For sure.
And the company as a whole is at a really nice size right now. We're just under 50 employees. We can manage it well. We know what's happening with everybody. I know everybody's first and last name without thinking about it. They're all people who I care about, that I have some kind of relationship with. And obviously people that are here longer, you have more of a relationship with, but it's just growing to grow the business is not something that drives me. It's I want the business to be better and us to be the best at what we do, not necessarily to have the biggest business or make the most amount of money. I want to have good relationships with my clients and my employees, and a really sustainable, steady growth model is what I really look forward to. And I think just always looking for more efficient ways to do things, and to take, if there's a job that can be done of the same or greater quality in an easier way by spending money on equipment, I think that's something that we're interested in doing.
So you've got kind of a unique position with your work history. You've worked for someone else, and now you work and help run a family business. Talk a little bit about what's it like working in and helping co-run a family business, because some of our students are going to want to go out and maybe start their own business someday, and they might do that with a family member. So talk a little bit about that, and then talk a little bit about how what are some of the strengths of that model, and maybe even some of the challenges.
Well, I think I would throw up a huge caution sign to anybody that wants to be in any partnership, family or not. And family just adds an extra dynamic that when it's done at the end of the day, you're still attached to this person in a way that you're not if it's just a regular business partnership. But who you go into business with is a huge deal. And I think the big thing is, and this is something that I'm learning as we go, and I wish I knew when I came back to the business what I knew now, but communicating really clearly what you want and what your expectations are, and having the other parties communicate what their expectations are, and you got to talk about it, and you got to have accountability for what each role is and what that means, and what the compensation for that is, and what the plan to move on to the next level is. And I think you always have to have some kind of a plan for the succession of the business, and it gets so complicated. I'm not going to go into it in this interview, but being part of a family business is super challenging on those fronts, and that's with any partnership, and it's just amplified with the family. The positive side is I have people that I can trust without question to do the right thing, and I know where they stand, and I know who they are as people, and even if it's not always exactly what you want, there's no surprises. They're your family. You know who they are. You know their characteristics, and you can rely on them to be who they are, and when you're down, somebody else picks you up. If you can't make it, you know you have somebody handling the business that's got your best interest in mind and theirs, and that's the biggest benefit to the family business.
Nice.
Having people you can trust.
So I'm going to kind of pivot in our conversation here, and I want to focus really more in on the industry aspect of things now. So if someone were interested in becoming part of the tree care industry, you've already mentioned some things. You talked about hard work, you talk about being physical, you talk about being smart. What are some of the specific, maybe technical skills that people would need to be prepared to develop to be successful in this career?
Well, there's rare occasion when you find a qualified arborist that's trained in a manner that you don't have to rework the whole person to get what you want from a climbing arborist perspective. And those people exist, and we have some of them that work for us that are absolutely some of our best employees, without question. But I think starting that training process from within is maybe one of the better ways to get exactly what you want as an employer. So I'm going to answer your question and say, I think having a great attitude, being able to think on your feet, being able to show up every day and just make thoughtful decisions, whatever it is you do. It's like, well, why did you do that? And it's like, you're not always going to do the same thing that I do, but it should never be like, oh, I don't know.
Right.
And I don't mean to demean this, but the climbing part is something that we can teach people, and saying somebody needs to walk in the door ready to climb is a big stretch that that you got an ant on your beard, if you care. Sorry.
That's all right. We're outside, baby.
But if you learned basic climbing techniques, that really you need somebody to teach you that to do it safely. I don't think it's like I would recommend just watching a YouTube video and starting to learn how to climb. But I actually think the way that I learned how to climb is the way that I would teach people to climb, with the old school techniques, because you're doing it with, you know, essentially a rope in your harness, and you can get by, where if you were stuck in a spot and you didn't have all the gadgets that we use every day to be more efficient, you could still get by. And I think that would be where I would start everybody at. And actually practicing proper pruning cuts on the ground and on trees you can reach from the ground, on junky trees that you're going to remove, and practice the proper cuts. When you're doing those things, the 3-cut method's a great thing. It's I don't know, we're not going to go into all kinds of depth about that, but certainly if people want to like find things that they can do so that they're more game ready, and making a proper cut is one of the biggest parts of our job. Learning how to get way out on a tree, there's no way to practice that without somebody at least getting the ball rolling for you to do it safely.
Well, one of the things that you know, you and I developed and kind of team taught you guys more than me, but we team taught a program last fall with your staff. And one of the things that really struck me about that experience was when we broke folks into groups of 3, and we had 3 different people kind of discussing pruning techniques. And you and Jay and your dad all did things similar but slightly different. And I think what I heard you say in that response is there's no one way to do it. There are best practices, but if someone's going to come into a company, they need to be pliable to figure out what, like if you hire an arborist from another organization, you're going to have, there's going to be some training time even for them, because Madison's way might be a little different than Tree Care Company X's way.
For sure, that's the case. And really anybody that comes in new, even if they're an experienced crew leader, they're going to not be a crew leader here for a long time until we gain the confidence that they have the skill sets and the trust that we need to be in that position. And some people are ready much quicker than what you expect, and
Sure.
some people take a lot longer to get to that spot. And the thing about the three of us doing each thing a little different is that you have, with a tree, I'm going to say an infinite amount of possibilities of moves you can make, and decisions to make, and it is overall guiding principles that you're trying to get to, not this limb has to be cut here. And there are certain circumstances where there's much better decisions than others that can be made. And then there's the other 80% of the time where you could cut here or you could cut here, and those are both perfectly acceptable to do the right thing for the tree and accomplish the job.
I think that's what makes pruning trees difficult.
Yeah.
Because it's not like a math problem that there's only one answer.
Right.
You know, here's the equation, solve it, find X, boom, you're right. In this, and it gets back to what you said before, it's that ability to make a decision based on knowledge. So that's a good, I think that's helpful.
And I want to clarify one thing. When the three of us pruned the trees, and we all did it a little bit different, mine was done the best.
Absolutely.
Way.
Absolutely.
I'm teasing.
And
They
I
were
told
all
Jay
fine.
the same thing, and I'll tell your dad the same thing when I see him next.
You're like, John did the best,
Yeah,
right?
Right.
You know.
Right. No, I'm gonna tell them they did the best. So talk a little bit about what a typical day looks like for an arborist. So they come into work, they get here at 7 o'clock or whatever time you guys start. Kind of just walk us through. I know no day's typical, but
Right.
generally speaking, what's it look like? So somebody who's never worked in this industry before,
Right.
that I want them to walk away from this, listen to this video, saying, "Oh, okay, that's kind of what my day would look like."
Sure. So I think every company does things a little bit differently. Here we start at 7:30, and hopefully people come 5 or 10 minutes early, so they're on time and not late. But you know, nobody's perfect,
Right.
and we give out the assignment for the day. The job is reviewed with the crew leader of that crew. You find out what crew you're on or who you're working with, whether you're the leader or the other people, what equipment you're going to take, and we'll go over any job specifics that you have. It's a complicated job. The salesperson, the arborist on that job is going to hopefully show up and review the technical difficulties of it. If you have a client that's particularly difficult, you're going to want to make sure that you're there to be an intermediate between the client and the arborist that it's actually doing the work, so they can focus on the work and not on dealing with the client the whole day. And they're going to get to the job. In an ideal situation, what they should be doing is the crew leader should be doing a job briefing and surveying the entire scene and letting the other crew members know what is expected of everybody and where we should go. And then you're going to get to work. You're going to take lunch in the middle of the day. 45 minutes, some of the people go to pick up a sandwich somewhere or whatever, and other people pack lunch, and then get back to the job. Every job is different, right? One day you're climbing a huge oak tree that's like the most prestigious tree you've ever climbed in your life, and the other day you're pruning a view over Columbia Parkway, and you're like, man, this work is tough.
Yeah.
And it's not rewarding, but you know what, when you get done, the view is amazing
Right.
over those properties, and it makes a huge difference doing a good job
Right.
on that, even if it's not the most fun job in the world. And it's hard work.
Yep.
You're going to sweat a lot. You're going to go home sore. You're tired. One of my favorite parts about doing tree work, and it's what I miss, is at the end of the day, you get to leave it at work, and you go home, and you've worked hard. You've physically and mentally. You've used both, and you sleep really well at night. It's amazing when you work your body and your brain so hard during the day, and it's super rewarding to get done. And if you take like a family member in a car ride and you drive by, I can't tell you how many times I've done it. It's like, oh, I pruned that tree, or I planted that tree, and some of them are 20 years later. And they just look amazing, and it's like, oh my gosh, you were part of making this, great creation.
Very gratifying.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do that with my sons. It's I take them to show them trees I planted 28 years ago, and it's like, wow,
It's
that's
amazing.
great. Yeah, it really is cool experience. Talk a little bit about some of the hazards that are associated with tree care, because there are hazards as well.
It's a dangerous industry. There's no doubt. I think proper training, showing up ready to work and on your A game is like, I know like it's so hard to do and people don't get sent home because they don't sleep well at night or whatever, but I think getting a good night's rest and coming in ready to go with all your wits about you is the best way. And then it's you gotta, every time you do something, think about your safety and the safety of everybody else with every move you make. It's got to be part of your decision making, and there's tons of training that happens internally. We bring in trainers from the outside sporadically. We send the guys to training seminars sometimes. Some of it's safety related, some of it's more technical skills related, but it's a constant thing to stay safe all the time and continue to train to get better. You can't just go at any point in your career, there's nothing else I can learn. I've learned it all. And that's somebody that I don't want working for me, to be honest.
Yeah. That's a person that's going to cause an accident.
Yeah, it's just not, I don't understand, like, as humans, like, whether, no matter what it is you're doing, it's like every day we should try to get a little bit better.
Yeah. And
that's the same here.
Yeah.
And it's, you know, people can get cut with chainsaws, people can fall out of trees, people can get hurt by equipment. But, you know, most of the injuries are silly little back tweaks where you step on a log funny, and you're carrying a 30-pound log, which is no big deal, and you step on a root or something and you tweak your back or a shoulder. And, you know, the more common injuries are like the weird ones that could happen to anybody doing anything.
Right.
And really, I hate to bring this up as well, but according to the insurance company and the rates they charge us, the biggest risk we have is on the road, driving to the job.
Driving to the job site, yeah, it makes sense.
And that, you know, you don't think about that, but
that's a good point. You talk a lot about culturing trees, and we all know that trees bring a tremendous added value to a homeowner. You know, you go to a new subdivision where there are no trees, and then you go to somewhere like Hyde Park or Indian Hill where there's mature trees, and instantly you see the connection between the landscape and the home. Talk just briefly about kind of your philosophy overall. How does pruning and culturing a young tree different than pruning and culturing a middle-aged tree versus a tree that's mature that we're trying to keep for the long haul?
When we're talking about shade trees, your main thing is wanting to establish a strong central leader and having nice branch spacing so that in time, as these trees grow, everything's got room and everything fits. The other thing you do is, assuming you're the one that's going to be at the property for the next 30 years or 50 years or whatever, most people don't stay that long, but you're thinking about, do I want this tree to have branches all the way to the ground and to take up the entire yard with branches like a beech tree or something I'm thinking about, which looks amazing, but it might hide your whole house. And you may want a tree where you're planning to lift up the bottom 30 feet, but you're not going to do that all at one time. So you slowly work away at that. You know, you never want more than 1/3 of the trunk exposed for the total canopy. I think that would be like the beginning stages of tree pruning, and the middle stages would be, in my opinion, continuing to work on the branches and to raise the canopy to the appropriate height over time, incrementally. And then you may do a little bit of the tip lightening depending on the species when they get really heavy limbs, and that you get a snow load or an ice load and they'll break out. And then mature tree pruning really ends up being as much safety as it is tree preservation. And what we do probably more than anything else is we're lightening the heavy limbs on these big, I'll just use an oak tree for example, because it's probably the most common tree we work on. And the limbs are spread way out here, and you're going to see the branches stretch down. If we can just take a little bit of weight way out of the end of those, it makes the whole limb so much stronger. And of course, you're going to get the dead wood, but you're not worrying about central leaders and those kind of things in a big mature tree. That's that's out. And I want to clarify a point that I was making about safety and tree preservation. I think it's a win-win. Is that if a branch breaks out, that's what can hurt somebody or damage property. But that also oftentimes when it rips out in particular back into the trunk, puts a wound into that tree that's the beginning of the end.
Yeah.
And decay is going to set back into that trunk. And, you know, you say like, well, I'm not worried about this or that or whatever, but you were worried about both, because if something breaks out, somebody gets hurt and the tree might have to come out from something that was preventable with a little bit of extra maintenance.
Talk a little bit about the equipment that you use to care for trees. You guys have an extensive collection of equipment. You mentioned it earlier, how it's back saving, it's human friendly, it's ergonomic, it increases productivity. Describe some of the things that you use.
So, you know, a crane is a big part of it, which is usually, not always, but it's a much better tool for tree removal. But that's a huge back saver, and it's a huge saver for the properties you're working on too, to be able to lift something really large and heavy up and move it out versus having to rope everything down or fell it, drop a trunk on the ground. You know, that's pretty, leaves a much bigger footprint than when you're pulling things out with a crane. We have several different lift trucks, which are bucket trucks that different sizes for different purposes. We also have, it's called a spider lift, is probably the most recognizable name, but it's a backyard lift that has rubber tracks, and it drives into the backyard, and it spreads out big outrigger legs, which is where the spider thing comes from, and that actually goes up like 90 feet tall. And they make some that are smaller or larger, but that was a huge purchase for us. But think about all these dead ash trees that are in people's backyards that you can't climb them anymore. And you know, we just looked around, and it's like, we have to have an option for this that's not just telling the client we can drop it maybe in the least damaging place possible, because when they're that dead, they don't always, even with the best of tree fellers, they don't always go where you want it to go. So that's been a huge safety boost for us. The other things that we've got recently, which I think are probably the wave of the future, are the debris loaders, the grapple trucks. And if you look at the energy that it takes to feed all these things through a chipper, and the wear and tear on a chipper versus this hydraulic arm that's picking up the debris and putting it in the truck, it just is a much more efficient thing. And that's another thing that's taking some of the wear and tear off of the arborists that are on site doing the work. The other thing, that when I was a kid, we really didn't have anything, but the mini loaders have been game changers, and those take all of the debris from the backyard or wherever and bring it to the chipper or to the grapple truck or wherever it's going, and those are huge savers. And some of them are on rubber tracks, which are really good for the more slippery situations and when things are really dry. And then we have some of the mini articulating loaders, which are on wheels, which don't handle the terrain quite as well, but are really good for wetter ground. Excuse me.
No worries, man. So, last question, and this is a big, broad question, but where do you see the tree care industry going, and what are some of the trends that are coming up? I mean, I think I don't have the bird's eye view you do of the tree industry, but I have noticed in the last few years there's been an uptick of interest in trees in general in our society. I think people are finally making the connection that trees are an integral part of a healthy environment, no matter where they are. So where do you see those things going?
I think that the industry is going to keep growing because of that interest that you're saying. I think that you brought this point up earlier, but everybody feels it, even if you can't quantify it or put a number to it. When you go to a neighborhood that has nice mature trees, it's just way nicer than any place you go to that's an old farm field and they got three 3-inch pear trees in their front yard. You know, it's just not the same thing, and people do see the value in that. I think the industry is going to be more equipment centric and more gear centric to save the bodies of that's our most valuable asset, are the people that work for us. And if for 1 second you think the equipment's more important or anything's more important, it's like, no, our arborists, our staff, our landscapers, our mechanics that support You know, that to me, people think that you just hire somebody else and you just move on. And it's like, no, those are our most valuable resources. We've trained you, we've developed relationships, we have, like, we're invested in you like part of our family, and breakups hurt and it's not fun, and we want to nurture those relationships and communicate and keep people feeling good about what they're doing. We want to create career paths to keep people around for long term and give them options to run equipment and do things that allow them to have a extended career much longer than if you're just the person climbing the tree every day. I don't know if I answered the question all the way.
Yeah, I think you did. Correct me if I'm wrong, but what I hear you saying is the future is very bright for this industry. It's not in decline like some industries are in
Right.
decline.
Right.
This one is on the uptick.
I agree with that.
And I think it bears out with just the demand for plants. Like, you know, I talk to landscape people and they can't find trees and they can't find stuff, so people are buying that stuff up because there is such a value in it.
Right. I agree.
So
And I want to bring up like another point that I didn't touch on with one of your earlier questions, and maybe you didn't ask it directly, but one of my big things that I'm always talking to clients about is successional planning with trees on their estate.
Yep.
So you'll go to I'll just say there's a local country club here in Anderson, and they took down a whole bunch of trees and they opened this golf course up, and I'm in one of my clients' backyards looking at the golf course, and the whole course has 75-year-old oak trees all over it.
Right.
And there's not one tree I could see, as far as I could see, that was newly planted.
Yep.
And it's like, what's the next step here? I know that you don't want a bunch of trees all over the golf course, but if you're not planting them now, you're going to be treeless in 20 or 30, you know, I mean, there might be a few, but so on smaller properties, on a smaller scale, I'm always looking for, you know, somebody says, I can't deal without the shade and I love my trees so much, and I agree with them. And it's like, well, how do we get another tree started now? So in 20 years, when this one's kind of on its last leg, we have something quasi-mature that gives us some of the things we love about trees happening here. And that's something that I think a lot of people miss the boat on, and it's a conversation that I love having with my clients, and I try to encourage them to do it. And selfishly, it's also ensuring that there's more trees for the next generation to take care of, but I think everybody benefits from that, including me.
Yep. I think that's probably one of the biggest things I've learned from you the last 4 or 5 years I've known you. Trees are a long-term commitment, and they got to be cared for the long term, especially trees and landscapes. They're it's not something you just prune once and walk away from and never prune again. It's that touch point. It's coming back to it 3-5 years later, checking it out, doing those little corrective prunes. And it's just, I think that gets lost sometimes in typical landscaping. And it's, you know, thank goodness Madison Tree's around to pick up that slack.
Thanks, Jim. I appreciate that.
John, thank you for your time. This is great.
Thanks
Very
for having me.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep.